Hello and welcome to a special episode of To The Point. In less than 3 days, Raghuram Rajan steps down as Governor of the Reserve Bank of India and returns to America to resume his academic career. But today, in the only exit interview he's agreed to give, he reflects on his 3 years as Governor of the RBI, his successes and failures, the issues he's had to contend with, the criticisms that he's had to face. Tomorrow, in part 2 of this exclusive interview, Raghuram Rajan will speak about the economy, the state in which he leaves it, the challenges it faces, and how India should respond to them. Governor Rajan, let's start with you. As I said, in less than 72 hours, you'll be handing over charge of the Reserve Bank of India. How will you look back on this experience?
Well, personally, it's been an extremely fulfilling one. I think I've learned a lot. I hope in the Reserve Bank we have actually done some interesting and useful things for the economy, putting it on a better track. And the country as a whole, I think, is on a more sustainable growth path. So, looking back, I feel very good.
You are a satisfied and happy man today?
Broadly, yes. Yes, I think we have managed to do a lot of things. Of course, we've created a platform which needs to be built upon. And, that requires meeting challenges that will come in the future.
Let's talk about that platform. You've had a lot of praise in the last 3 years, but you've also faced a certain amount of criticism. What are the decisions and achievements that you're most proud of?
Well, I would say, first, we finally started getting a handle on inflation. And there's a reasonable consensus. I wouldn't say everybody's happy, but there's a reasonable consensus that this is the way to go. That required a lot of public persuasion and a lot of public discussion. But we have an inflation framework that the RBI is supposed to respect, given by the government. We have the Monetary Policy Committee soon to be set up. So we are actually operating under a modern framework which many other emerging markets adopted long before us. So,
and this gives you a fair measure of pride, that this is an achievement that you've left behind.
To my mind, this is an institutional change for the better, because it will help us move towards sustainable growth, not these periods of bouts of high inflation and then rapid increases in interest rates to contain it. The second thing I think we've done is started moving the dialogue on debt towards one where the borrower actually is supposed to repay the debt and not involve the lender as a partner when he gets into difficulty. So the structures for recovery are improving. You've seen the bankruptcy law being passed by Parliament. We've had the debt recovery tribunals strengthened, but we've also had a number of measures created by the RBI to enable banks to recover bad debts. Now, this is not just about recovery, it's also about putting projects that are in difficulty back on track so that they can produce the power or produce the goods and services that were promised. So that's number 2, that the dialogue on recovery has changed.
Is there a number 3?
Yeah, there is a number 3.
What is it?
Payments. Today, we have a dramatic change in the way you can pay. UPI was started by NPCI 2 days ago. Essentially, you give me current at something dot XYZ, and I can send you a payment from my bank account to your bank account without knowing anything more. This is just one example of the tremendous developments in payments that have happened over the last few years. And what this will do is help that villager sitting on that hilltop in Uttarakhand make a payment to her shopkeeper without any exchange of cash. So she doesn't have to go to that ATM in the village 10 miles below. She doesn't have to access her bank account. She can make that payment.
So would I be right in saying that the legacy that you are proud of as you depart from this job is, 1, credible handling of inflation, secondly, starting a proper and sensible dialogue on debt, and thirdly, facilitating payments so that little villagers can actually handle it in the easiest way?
Payments, inclusion, there are a whole set of reforms that have been started. Take banks. We have a whole new set of banks coming in. We had 10-year periods in which no new banks came in. Over the next year or so, we'll have close to 20 banks entering. different kinds of banks.
It's a rich legacy you leave behind on the positive side. With the benefit of hindsight, are there things that you would have done differently? Are there mistakes or faults that you can identify?
Well, there are obviously places where one should have paid closer attention early on. For example, in the beginning of this year, we had a certain amount of liquidity shortage in the system. And it crept up on us without us fully realizing it, partly because we were providing enough liquidity at the short end, but what was missing was liquidity at the longer end. Now, as the numbers started coming in and we realized we weren't supplying enough, we changed our framework, because part of the problem was the framework itself was not accepting that problem. We changed our framework and we started supplying liquidity on both ends. You can see that in the bond yields today. The government bond yield is at 7.1%, lower than it has been in the last 5 years.
Successes, mistakes are two aspects. A third is, are there incomplete tasks that you would like to have handled, but now you're going to have to leave to your successor?
Well, as I said, we've built a platform. Now, still on that platform, you have to put more buildings. And that requires addressing the challenges as they come. Now, this is a never-ending job. You're never finished building, you're never finished reforming. And one could keep going on. So in that sense, yes, it is unfinished. But to the extent of, I started with a plan, to my mind, I've completed 95% of what I wanted to do.
I'll tell you why I asked this question, because in the letter you wrote to RBI staff in June, you identified two uncompleted tasks. One of them was the continuing cleanup of banks, and the other was bringing inflation within the target zone. Now, if you had got the right offer, would you have preferred to accept an extension so that you could complete these tasks?
I think that's a hypothetical question, and it's not clear how one would answer that. What I would say is that, yes, the tasks aren't completely finished. There is the cleanup of the banking system, which I hope will be largely done by March of 2017. That's another 6 months away. And there was the task of putting in the framework for the Monetary Policy Committee, getting a Monetary Policy Committee in place, running a few meetings with it to make sure it works. Now, those would be sort of more immediate tasks that probably could have been finished, but there's
You're
no point
leaving at
dwelling
a
on
time
it.
when inflation has just edged above 6%. Is that an element of regret for you?
Well, so my last reading is not going to be 6%, but I believe the reading for August will be the last reading during my term. I expect that to be below 6%. That was where we needed to bring it. I think I will at least leave it. My sense is it should come down from 6 over the next few months.
Now, in that letter that you wrote in June, when you identified two incomplete tasks that you were leaving for your successor, you also said, and I'm quoting, "While I was open to seeing these developments through, on due reflection and after consultation with the government, I will be returning to academia on the 4th of September." Can I ask you, what was that consultation with the government?
Well, the government and I have been engaged in a dialogue about whether it made sense for me to continue. And fundamentally, when I got into this job, I saw it as a 3-year term. I also realized or recognized I needed to go back to academia. Too many years away from academia renders you pretty incompetent at research and teaching, etc. So I had to go back. Question was, how much time? And I thought, because of these unfinished tasks, I was willing perhaps to stay, provided we could reach the right kind of agreement. We didn't. And that was where it ended.
So the problem, and I'm not pushing you into territory you don't want to talk about, the problem was you were willing to stay. Could you have reached the right agreement? You didn't reach the right agreement.
Right. And there were a variety of places where differences may have been in terms of horizons and this and that. So I think we just didn't reach an agreement where, remember, my term came to an end, so it would have to be a new term.
Absolutely. And as you said, you were under pressure to go back to academia because the longer you're away, the more difficult it is to get back into research. Yeah. Would you have accepted if you were offered a 1-year term rather than a 2-year extension? Would that have made life easier?
That's a hypothetical. We didn't reach that point, so in that sense.
One other question. Was there any attempt made by the Prime Minister or the Finance Minister to persuade you to think again, to reconsider and stay on?
No, as I said, I think we started the dialogue and we were going along that path, but essentially we agreed at some point it makes sense to pursue the dialogue further.
And when you reach that point that it doesn't make sense to pursue the dialogue further, in your heart were you a little disappointed?
Look, in terms of unfinished tasks, it's always good to finish and look back and say, you know, I've sealed and signed it, and this is.
So there was an element of, I wish I could have.
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. I would say that everything comes to an end at some point, and you have to move on. So right now my focus is, let's look ahead and see what needs to be done, and not look back.
You faced, as I said in my first two questions, a certain amount of criticism while you were here. There were two areas where you first faced it, perhaps most intensity of all. Mm-hmm. Several members of the government, several senior industrialists, maybe a couple of economists criticized you for not cutting interest rates further than you did. Now, the truth is, from January 2015 till now, you've cut it by 150 basis points. But as you look back with hindsight, do you think you could have cut further? Or do you take heart from the fact that with inflation creeping up just above 6%, you were perhaps wise not to?
Well, you took the words out of my mouth. With inflation above our target, it's hard to see how we would have been any lower if I had cut significantly at that point. So you have to build credibility for a new regime, which means you have to stay within that regime as you start off. If you sort of even break the bounds right off the bat, you've lost credibility. So I think it's extremely important that we did what we did. I feel absolutely confident we used all the room we had, but we didn't have any more room.
You said a very important thing. The credibility of the Reserve Bank's new regime of tackling inflation required that you did not cut interest rates, that you stood by high rates, because otherwise you would have undermined the credibility of the institution you had.
Absolutely. And this is something that people actually are starting to understand, that in fact you cannot respond to the clamor of the moment, because the clamor of the moment is very short-sighted. Yes, inflation is 4.5% now, let's cut interest rates to the bone. No, the point is to keep it low over a sustained period. And we can't just follow in the inflation of the moment and say we have plenty of room. We have to project ahead. And much of our communication was about explaining that we didn't have that much room because there were other factors which would come into play. Now, we used all the room whenever we had the room.
In fact, that's the interesting second question I was going to ask you. Why do you believe banks did not pass on the full 150 basis point interest rate cuts that you did? And secondly, let me add, if they had fully passed it on, would your handling of interest rates have been perceived very differently today?
Well, I think that the banks, the primary problem in passing through was partly a weak economy where there was not that much credit demand. So as they cut interest rates, they lost income from existing clients but didn't get any new clients. And so that was one concern they had.
So they were caught in a catch-22.
They were caught in a little bit of a catch-22. Some of them were trying to protect income because they had stressed balance sheets. They weren't trying to expand their balance sheet. And so once again, the same argument. Why do I want to increase my loans when really I don't want to make any loans? Now, this is why the second aspect of our plan on cleaning up bank balance sheets came in, that if we are really to get substantial transmission and substantial credit growth in the economy, we have to have banks that are prepared to lend. And for them to be prepared to lend, they have to clean up their balance sheets. Now, the same guys who are complaining about interest rates being too high are also complaining about us forcing the banks to clean up their balance sheet. They don't realize they're connected. Strongly connected.
But is there a sense in which the criticism you faced because you refused to reduce interest rates as there was a popular demand to do was actually a reflection of the fact that banks were unable to push through your interest rate cuts, and so you became a victim of a catch-22 that was affecting the banks?
No, I don't want to blame the banks either. They have a hard job. I would say that the markets did pass on those interest rate cuts So we've seen corporations going to the markets and borrowing from commercial paper markets. It's almost doubled from about 1.2 lakh crores to 3 lakh crores now. But the second aspect is, I get a letter a day, maybe multiple letters, depending on how much screening my staff do, on pensioners complaining about low interest rates. So in the same at the same time as borrowers are complaining about very high interest rates, you have pensioners saying, you've cut interest rates to the bone. I used to get 9.5%, now I'm getting 7.25%. Why are you doing this? Inflation is still high. You have to find a balance between the two, between the vocal borrower who makes it to the newspapers and influences influential people in the economy, and the pensioner who nobody listens to but who's also hurt. And that's what we've been trying to do, maintain a interest rate which is in the middle.
Now, a second criticism you faced was that you had stepped out of line when you spoke about what's called the rising tide of intolerance in the country, or when you punctured the unrealistic euphoria around allegedly India's economic exceptionalism. Looking back on those comments, do you believe they were legitimate issues to be raised by the Governor of the Bank of India, or do you now regret having ventured into that terrain?
No, I think that there are two different sets of comments, so let me take each one separately. I think that in this function, you have the duty to educate, to explain what you're doing, why you're doing, as best as you can. So, for example, on the interest rate issue, I have to explain to depositors why, even though nominal interest rates have come down from 9 to 7.25%, they're still better off today, because inflation is much lower, so they're getting a real interest rate. I used the example of dosas to explain to them that they were in fact better off. So there is a communication function which requires you to be out there in the open trying to educate. And I'm glad that so many people now are paying attention.
Can I interrupt at that point?
Yeah.
Was it in fact a communication function that lay behind your talking about the rise of intolerance?
So that's the second issue. This platform is also one where a lot of people, because perhaps of the education role that you play, a lot of people look up to you, and you have a sense of responsibility. So where I talked about tolerance, I didn't talk about a rising tide of intolerance. I talked about the need for tolerance going forward if we were to have an economy which was based on ideas, based on engagement, based on dialogue. And that was in a speech at the IIT Delhi convocation. When you're talking to young minds and you're trying to tell them about a future we want to aspire to, you draw on our history of tolerance in the past and you tell them this is where we should be, this is where we should be going. I don't think that is stepping out of bounds. I think that is the legitimate duty, in fact the moral responsibility of a public figure who has the attention of young minds to tell them this is what good citizenship is about. This is where we should be going. I have absolutely no regrets about saying that. If people think that was a criticism of the government, I think they should revisit what is in that speech and what any government would say about what its moral duty is.
But you said a very important thing. You saw it as your moral duty. You saw it as not just part of your task, but your responsibility to actually raise and address these issues, given A, the occasion, a convocation at IIT, and B, the fact that you were talking to students, what you call young minds. It was a duty for you to do, and had you not done it, you'd have been doing a disservice to the job you hold today.
Absolutely. I think it would be a failure of using an opportunity to talk about citizenship. It wasn't about politics. It was about citizenship at a time when, in fact, there was a dialogue about tolerance, intolerance, etc. Absolutely. The time was chosen because you talk about topical issues. But you engage on them in a way that is apolitical, which is about the best interests of our democracy. And I think that's absolutely legitimate.
You're absolutely right when you say that you weren't talking or referring to the government directly at all. I have a set of quotations from that speech you gave to the IIT convocation in October last year. You said, tolerance rules out anyone imposing a particular view or ideology simply because of their power. Tolerance requires that you have the right to behave differently so long as it does not hurt others seriously. Groups should not be looking for slights any and everywhere. There is too much of that which is seen as offensiveness. And finally, you said, Tolerance means not being so insecure about one's ideas that one cannot subject them to challenge. Now, none of that refers to the government, but given the circumstances of the time that prevailed in October 2015, many thought you were referring to the BJP perhaps, elements within the BJP, perhaps the Sangh Parivar as a whole, because they were the ones who were expressing intolerance, they were the ones who were taking offense easily. Did you have them at the back of your mind?
No, I had the environment certainly at the back of my mind where there was a discussion of tolerance. It was a topical issue. But a week after I gave that speech, I met a cabinet minister who said, I've been saying exactly these things. So it wasn't as if this was coming out of the blue. It wasn't as if it was quote unquote anti-government. I mean, which government is going to preach intolerance?
But another very interesting thing is that although publicly spokesmen of the government were critical of what you'd said, a BJP minister privately said he completely agreed with you.
He said he had been saying those things. Look, I don't think the way the speeches are sometimes interpreted, when you read the speeches, it comes out the way the criticism appears. We have, a very active social media, which sort of takes away from speeches what it wants to hear. And soon there is a active representation of that speech. You just quoted from it. Who would disagree with some of those elements?
In fact, as you said, this particular minister said that he'd been saying the same things himself in public.
Absolutely.
Given that he's been saying the same things, can I venture to ask you who this gentleman was?
No. I should respect the private conversation. But
although he wouldn't be embarrassed since he's saying the same things.
No, look, but the point I'm trying to make is that the ideas in that speech, as opposed to the reporting of that speech. The reporting of that speech is this was an anti-government speech about intolerance. The actual content of that speech is a plea for tolerance because it's in the best tradition of India and a continuation of that tradition into the future. It wasn't about saying this, we have an intolerant environment. It was a plea for continuing our tradition.
So in this instance, you became a victim of the misreporting, perhaps I should even venture to say deliberate misreporting by social media. The way they reported or picked up elements of your speech ended up distorting it and giving a wrong impression.
Well, look, I don't want to go into that I was misquoted kind of complaint. I mean, clearly communication is a continuous process. You have to keep repeating. Sometimes ideas don't come out the way you intended, and you have to keep emphasizing this is what I want to say. Now, on something like tolerance, there aren't so many occasions where you can say it because I have a day job. As governor of the Reserve Bank, I can't spend my time talking about tolerance. But certainly on things like inflation, certainly on things like recovery of bad debt, you get second and third chances to say exactly what you were intending to say, and you should use that platform.
One last question about you. Many of your admirers, many of your supporters believe that there were occasions when you were perhaps shabbily treated, maybe even unfairly treated. Let me give you an example or two. When you came up with that phrase, that in the land of the blind, the one-eyed is king, Nirmala Sitharaman criticized you, she ticked you off and she said you should have used better language, and as far as I remember, absolutely no one spoke out in your support. Even worse, when Subramaniam Swamy said you were willfully and deliberately wrecking the economy and suggested you weren't even fully Indian, as far as I recall, the finance minister only weakly defended you. But in sharp contrast, when a few weeks later Subramaniam Swamy attacked Arvind Subramaniam, the chief economic advisor, the finance minister was forceful and robust in his rebuttal. And people noticed the difference between the way he had responded to criticism of you, the governor, and the way he responded to criticism of Arvind Subramaniam, the chief economic advisor. And my question is simple. Were you shabbily treated, unfairly treated at times?
Look, I don't dwell on these things. I think the real issue is when you look at the opportunities that we've had to make a difference, to work with the government to move forward, I think it's been a good relationship. I think we've made a lot of difference, and I think we've done it working with the government. Now, I think one can debate for a long time who said what and why and whether that was appropriate. I think we should look forward.
Absolutely. But did this affect the relationship? The fact that at a critical point of time, the governor of the Reserve Bank of India, not just Raghuram Rajan, but the governor is being criticized by a BJP MP, and the government is silent. The chief minister, sorry, the finance minister only weakly defends you. And then there's such a contrast when Arvind Subramanian becomes the target.
No, look, I think there is there is always criticism in this country. We have a raucous public dialogue, and you could always sort of say, look, by responding to this criticism, I am legitimizing it. So let me.
I don't want you to respond.
No, not me.
I'm talking about the government's lack of response.
Not me. I'm actually making a case that one can debate for a long time what motives were, but I'm saying there is we have a raucous economy, a raucous public dialogue. And there is a legitimate question whether every criticism needs to be responded to, and whether in responding to that criticism you're legitimizing it. But look, I'm not going to go into the minds of people and figure out why people do what they do.
Or why they don't speak when they should.
But what I think is important to emphasize is that the partnership in terms of reforms, in terms of activities, has been very strong.
Governor Rajan, let's take a break at that point. When I come back, I want to stop talking about you and turn instead to the office you're about to demit, the governorship of the Reserve Bank of India. How do you view that job? What sort of changes are needed? How should the relationship with the finance minister or the finance ministry be adjusted and changed if adjustment and change is needed? We'll be back in a moment's time for the second part of this unique, exclusive interview. Remember, it's Raghuram Rajan's only exit interview. See you in a moment's time. Welcome back, you're watching To The Point, and this is Raghuram Rajan's only exit interview given exclusively to this channel. And we're now going to talk about how he views the role of Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. Let's come to the post from which you step down in less than 3 days' time, the governorship of the Reserve Bank of India. In the light of your experience over the last 3 years and your understanding of the job, do you think it should be a straight, flat 5-year term rather than the present practice of a 3-year term followed usually, although not in your case, by a 2-year extension?
Well, I think what we need is a process by which we have a bench which is tried out in different places, so that you gain confidence about the capacity of that bench to fill the jobs, the economic jobs, the technocratic jobs that open up in the economy. So, for example, I think the idea of posting somebody as a deputy governor so that they gain knowledge, moving them elsewhere so that they see another part of the government, then bringing them back as governor, which used to be what was done in the past, or most recently appointing a deputy governor. These are the ways you gain confidence in the person that you are bringing up. Now, once you have confidence that this person can actually perform, can actually run an organization, has both the managerial as well as the knowledge capabilities to do it, I think a longer term would certainly protect them from taking decisions which are short-sighted. Ultimately, the value of organizations like the RBI are that they have a longer horizon than, say, other governmental organizations. That's what you depend on to keep you on the straight and narrow.
So if a longer term would protect the incumbent to take decisions which are the right decisions and not guided by short-sighted concerns, then surely it follows a 5-year term is a more sensible term than a 3-year term.
Well, there is also a possibility that a term be too long. I'm not waffling here, but I'm saying 3 may be too short. There is probably a term which is too long. 8 years is probably too long. Some countries have 8. Somewhere in between makes sense. What that number is, I think one has to spend more time thinking. The US has 4. Some other countries have 5. We need to think about what is appropriate.
What about the relationship between the governor and the Minister of Finance? Your predecessor, Duviri Subbarao, in his recent biography, has written about the differences he had, sometimes acrimonious differences, with 2 finance ministers. And in an interview he gave me last month, he happily accepted that the relationship between the governor and the Minister of Finance is often tense. It can at times be acrimonious, and it needs to be handled delicately by both sides. Would you accept that characterization?
I would say it is an environment where mutual respect is extremely important. That on the one hand, as I said, it starts with the fact that you may have different horizons. And because you have different horizons, you have different views about a particular issue. So it's important that on the one hand, the governor be prepared to listen to various arguments from the finance minister's side or the prime minister's side. And from their side, they respect the fact that once they have made the arguments, this is an independent agency, and the agency should be allowed to make the decision it has to make. And I think if that mutual respect is there, it's a relationship that works as it should work. Yes, the governor occasionally listens to persuasive arguments from the other side, but ultimately the decision is the governor's own.
It's not just because they have different horizons that you need to have mutual respect, as you put it. There's another reason why you have to have mutual respect. Sometimes the governor may have been appointed by a different government, and the government that he serves may be a successor and perhaps an opponent to the earlier government, and that's another reason why you must have mutual respect.
Absolutely. I think, and there, you have to be careful to navigate and convey the reality that you are a technocrat and you are not choosing political sides. That's extremely important.
And that's an onus on the governor from the way you're phrasing it.
It is an onus on the governor, of course, to the extent that the governor is an asset, at least perceived by the new government. It's also an onus on the government to make the governor feel welcome.
Now, in the light of your experience and in the light of the experience of your predecessor, because he's written about it recently, are there changes that you would like to see in the relationship between the RBI and the Finance Ministry, or the governor and the Finance Minister?
Well, one of the changes we've actually brought in together with the government, which is the new framework. And the idea is...
That's the MPC.
That's the inflation framework objectives as well as the MPC. Here's what you're supposed to do. And here's the structure through which you do it, the Monetary Policy Committee. And the idea basically is this, that if the government really wants much lower interest rates, well, then change the inflation objectives. Say much higher inflation is tolerated. Don't give a fairly tight inflation band and say you have to stick within this, and then say, oh, please lower interest rates. Well, you've given the task to the bank, and the bank, in its best professional judgment, is going to figure out, how can I stay within this band that you've given me, and allow me to choose the interest rate that I need. That is the system we are in now. The Monetary Policy Committee will choose that interest rate. There are 6 people on the committee. Harder to influence 6 people, but they, in their best professional judgment, will choose what the level of the policy rate is, which will meet the target that is set for them. And to the extent that the government thinks the target is too tight, is creating problems, it has the opportunity to revise it every 5 years.
But you're saying something very interesting, and I'm slightly decoding you for a lay audience. And what you're saying is that once the Finance Ministry or the government has set a target and given the target to the bank to enforce, then stop second guessing how the governor does it. Let him do it in his best judgment. Don't keep telling him how to do it. Don't keep telling him to lower interest rates or raise interest rates, because that would be trespassing on his domain, and also it would be undermining the fact that you've given him a task to do.
Absolutely. So this is really about, here is your task. So the government sets the task. It's not the governor who decides. And then within that task, you have operational independence, because you're now using your professional judgment to best decide how to reach that task. That is actually the structure of inflation management that every developed and many developing countries are following. We've just reached that.
In the light of what you just said, I'm sort of provoked to ask, it's often been said that the problems you had, maybe the word problems is an exaggerated one, but the differences you had were not with the finance minister, but often with the finance secretary or with the bureaucracy of the finance ministry.
No, there are personalities who come and go. I can say that the relationship with the bureaucracy has been excellent in the last few quarters. It's been very good. And it's always been very cordial with the finance minister. The issue is never really where you differ tremendously on...
What about the finance secretary?
Good, very good.
All finance secretaries?
There are always differences in personalities. That's always there.
Now, you're leaving, as I said, in less than 3 days' time. Your deputy, Urjit Patel, will be taking over. He's had a certain measure of experience while he was working with you and under you. But now, as the top man of the RBI, he's going to have to handle this tricky relationship between the RBI, which is an institution, and the finance ministry, which is another institution. From your experience, what advice would you give him about handling this tricky relationship?
Well, Urjit is a grown-up man and knows how to do these things. He's been handling some of this relationship for some time, and I have confidence that he will manage it going forward. So I have no advice that would be any use to him. I've briefed him on all the issues that we're dealing with, but he's his own man.
Now, in that letter that you wrote the RBI in June, you had a tantalizing sentence, which I'm going to quote to you. I will, of course, always be available to serve my country when needed. What sort of situation or what sort of responsibility might bring you back?
So, I actually, first I'm going to, depart from from public speaking for some time. I think it's important to give my successor some space. So when I move out, I will stay out for a little while.
Deliberately enforced discreet silence.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. But then I actually want to learn a little more about certain aspects of our country. I will travel around a little bit and understand a little better what makes it tick.
So as a private individual or as an academic, you could pop back in?
I will pop back in. I will work with informal structures and so on, and see what I can do. This is an exciting, vibrant, large, immensely interesting country, and there's absolutely no reason why I should stay away.
One last question before I take a break. Has the government arranged or proposed a farewell function for you?
Yes, I will be saying goodbye to some government officials.
But that's you calling on them?
No. There will be an event organized in Delhi, absolutely, with the finance minister.
Let's end this particular part of the interview there, Governor Rajan. When I come back tomorrow, I want to talk to you about the state of the economy, how you see the challenges that lie ahead for India, and how you think India should respond to them. But for tonight, we'll end this particular part of the interview there. That was Governor Rajan in his last exit interview, in fact, his only exit interview, speaking about his 3 years as governor, the challenges he faced, the criticisms he had to handle, as well as what he believes were his achievements. Tomorrow in part 2, I shall talk to him about the state of the economy, the challenges India faces, and how he believes India should respond to them. See you tomorrow night.